So, once upon a time, I did a thing called Revisiting Starbound in 2019, and it was a little popular versus my usual. Just a little. Anyway, so we're gonna do this all over again with a game that I've wanted to gush about for years called Yume Nikki. So let's not waste any time and jump right on it, ladies and gentle people. Yume Nikki was one of the weirdest games I have ever played, and by extension it was also one of the most interesting and memorable gaming experiences I have had in the last 6 years. From the bright flashing tiles that make silly noises whenever you step on them, all the way to the dark undertones of horror and unease.
Nothing creepy about hands popping out of the floor and dream worlds and shit. Nothing at all creepy about, oh my fucking lord.
This game never ceased to keep me at a loss for words from practically start to finish. If anyone watches this video and has never heard of Yume Nikki, I would highly suggest that you at least take a swing at the original RPG horror from 2004. It isn't an objectively good game by any means when you take the entire game into account, but it's still one hell of an experience that I would love to share with anyone looking for a truly unique gaming experience. This video is going to step into a number of things. First off, we aren't just talking about the original RPG horror game by Kikiyama, but I'm also going to talk about the remake of the game that released in 2018. On top of this, we're going to touch into the fan base and the many Yume Nikki fan-made sequels that were created after the original game. Throughout the video, I'm mostly just going to gush about the many aspects of Yume Nikki that come to my mind while trying my best to stay fairly concise. If there's any actual point to my video, it would be to simply share the experience that me and many other people within this fandom had to other people without outright spoiling anything for you, and if possible, talk you into giving it a shot. The first section of the video is simple. Let's start with the game that started it all and work our way up from there. Yume Nikki is a 32-bit freeware game created by Kikiyama, a mysterious Japanese... I'm just kidding. That was literally straight off of the wiki, and if you guys want history like that about the game, just Google the Yume Nikki wiki. God, I love how that rhymes. Anyway, this niche little RPG horror game was where it all started. Back in my day, in my earlier YouTube days, I was desperately looking for another RPG horror to play since it was kind of my thing back then. So I did what any millennial would do, and I punched in the words popular RPG horror games into my Google search bar. I tried to step away from the big ones I already saw or heard about that big YouTubers covered, and one of them really stuck out to me. Enough to where I did some research to see if it would make a good Let's Play, since a lot of what I read about it made the game sound pretty hit or miss. We'll get into why that is in a short while. Before long, I downloaded the game, and...
Whoa, what? Whoa. Okay. This isn't quite what I was expecting for a game. Whoa.
I downloaded a goddamn fan game called Yume Nikki 3D and not the actual game. Attempt number 2, and yeah, there we go. Alright, nailed it. So loading in the game will give you these two images at the start. This is literally the only guidance that Yume Nikki gives you before casting you into the deep end and telling you good luck. Everything is left up to you after this. You remember when I told you that Yume Nikki isn't exactly an objectively good game? Well, this is part of it. Yume Nikki is incredibly nebulous at best and a confusing nightmare of poorly explained goals at worst. Now, I'm not shitting on the game exactly because this approach was completely intentional by design. Yume Nikki is a game that is ultimately about exploration. To be perfectly honest, while the game certainly has a definitive end, I don't think that it was ever designed to actually be beaten, if that makes sense. It's infinitely more likely that if you play the game without internet guidance, that you will just simply quit playing long before you figure out what the hell the game even wants from you. This being said, what exactly does the game want from you? Well, believe it or not, it's incredibly simple. As the first image tells you, hopping in bed will make you dream. Since you can't leave your room because Baratsuki is, I don't know, fucking allergic to society or something, hashtag Hikikomori, then your only real choice is to just sleep. I feel that, my dude. Trust me. As the second card tells you, the goal is to essentially play through the game and collect new effects, quote-unquote, which will grant you new abilities and can be dropped in the door room, otherwise known as the Nexus. So essentially this game is a collect-a-thon, really. Alright, cool. One problem for a noob. The game doesn't exactly explain what an effect is, so while you do know what you're looking for, you don't exactly know how to identify the thing. So, yeah, like I said, nebulous. Regardless, you decide to give it a shot, jump into the doorway of your choosing, and only then does it truly dawn on you what you have just signed up for. So here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. Yume Nikki is not your average everyday RPG Maker game in terms of its level design, and this is sort of what the game's identity hinges on. You see, Yume Nikki worlds are made up almost entirely out of looping maps with a parallax background. Now, if the word parallax doesn't mean shit to you, but you have played the old Nintendo 64 game Yoshi Story, then you are very well acquainted with what a parallax background is. They're typically some form of a skybox or landscape or something of that sort that moves at a separate rate than the foreground as you progress in a stage or however the fuck that you move. It's meant to give you an illusory feeling of depth within the area. It just makes the whole entire place feel more alive, you know what I mean? Yume Nikki uses a very similar strategy using parallax, except the thing about it is that these worlds oftentimes are really empty. There might be some landmarks here and there, but you'll just go through a long series of just nothing, just vastness of walking around with... What the fuck even is that in the background? Anyway, what I'm basically trying to say is that these elements mixed together make it extremely difficult to understand exactly where you are at any given time. You sort of just wander around in a singular direction, and then you wait until it loops, and then you pick another direction and wait until it loops again, etc., until you find something. And this is the general strategy that you do in order to be able to find out where the hell you need to go in these games. And each of these worlds has a ton of connections to other worlds within them. Some are much harder to reach than others, and then there are the other ones that seem to constantly plague you like a bad dream. Yes, I'm looking at you, Hell World. Each of these worlds has a theme or a motif to them, from the odd and somewhat creepy forest world all the way to the calm and serene dock world, my personal favorite. And each of these areas has its own identity that makes it pretty easy to differentiate from anywhere else within the game. This isn't the only thing that the game has to offer in terms of exploration as well, since there are a ton of small things added to the game across many of its worlds that are known as events. Now, some of these events are guaranteed so long as you meet a certain criteria or requirement to get to them, and some of those requirements may require having a prior effect or two to get to them, but I gotta be honest with you, most of these events will be decided by none other than the RNG gods themselves, because why the hell not? Look, while I'm not a big fan of RNG-dependent stuff in games, I do want to put a point out that I do understand it, at least. It's kind of like Doki Doki Literature Club, in which every person's experience is just a little bit different, and that's definitely cool. But it does make it a pain in the ass if you're somebody like me who wants to see everything the game has to offer. For example, I have played entirely through Yume Nikki, and I never experienced the infamous U-Boa event firsthand because I just simply couldn't be fucked to hit the light switch 3 billion times until the effect happened, or the event rather. But, anywho, to wrap up my thoughts here, ladies and gentlemen, the level design is kind of the appeal here, really. There are a ton of hidden goodies that do practically nothing for you aside from just being cool, and you really need to explore to find them. If the concept of the game doesn't necessarily appeal to you, I would still heavily suggest that you at least attempt it, but try exploring the worlds blindly at first. Then, once you start hitting some brick walls, I would utilize the wiki to see more information about the worlds you're visiting. After that, start looking up the different effects that you need. That's probably about as good as your pacing will ever get in these games. Once you get to the end of Yume Nikki and collect all of the effects, you are meant to drop them all within the Nexus. Where you drop them doesn't necessarily matter, just do it and wake up from the dream to watch your ending that you worked so hard to obtain, because that shit is, well, it's something else. No, I will not spoil it for you, just do it, trust me. Either way, however, the ending spawned a lot of theory crafters who really looked into the many things that you see throughout the gameplay experience. The game never really had any actual story behind it, but that doesn't stop you from asking questions about it, particularly about the main character, Matatsuki. The ending was a big motivation for that, since it kinda just created more questions rather than providing any answers. A lot of the fun behind this game and its fan games were the theories that people had behind them, the symbolism of the characters, the layout of the dream world, and everything in between. It was irrelevant if any of it was actually accurate, because ultimately the game was really open-ended. The fanbase has a ton of theories that can be read on the wiki about various themes throughout the game if you are interested. This also leads us into my segue, leading from theories the fanbase created to the games that the fanbase created. So, people clearly wanted more Yume Nikki, and the mad genius who made the original game kinda fell off the grid, and there was no confirmation of a true sequel coming anytime soon. And the fun thing about making a game with a smaller niche fanbase is that the people who you do attract tend to be infinitely more fucking dedicated than the average Joe in a fanbase for games that aren't so niche. With this, games like Yume Nikki, .flow, and LCD Dem were made. It sounds like I'm just reading the top 3, but I think these were organized by popularity because these 3 are often regarded as the best of the best as far as fan games go. I can't speak much for LCD Dem, but it is on the to-do list. But I've definitely played the other 2. .flow is without a doubt my all-time favorite Yume Nikki game, even including the official titles, and Yume Nikki, coincidentally, is my least favorite of the games, and the reason for this stems from that lack of guidance thing that I had mentioned earlier. The best way to kinda summarize the two in a sentence is that .flow was far more condensed and focused on the dark psychological horror aspect, while Yume Nikki was just very sprawling and kinda just filled with a bunch of things to discover as you traverse the game world. Now, the real thing behind the fan games and what kind of makes the Yume Nikki fandom what it is was mostly centered around the 2 main aspects of the OG game that we all knew and loved. First is the dreaming aspect and the exploration bit that gave the original its identity from a more gameplay side of things. The second is the theory crafting and the subtlety behind the dream world and the character that you play as. I'm going to dive into the 2 fan games I played and use these 2 aspects to sort of compare them. I don't want to say that either game is better or worse objectively. What I'm ultimately trying to point out here is how different they are, even though they share a similar genre, if you can even call it that, since both of these games sort of sit on the opposite ends of the spectrum. Starting with .flow, this title was by all intensive purposes a smaller game. It had fewer maps, fewer effects, and considerably fewer areas that the Nexus branched off into at the beginning of the Dream World. For comparison, the original Yume Nikki had 12 doors in its Nexus, meaning that there were 12 different paths that you could take at the beginning, leading to 12 different Dream Worlds. Yume Nikki expanded that number by 150% and had a grand total of 18 different branching paths from its Nexus, in a tiling pattern rather than the original circular doors idea. .flow simply had 4. It had 4 areas that it branched off into in the directions of a compass, so north, south, east, and west in different corridors. This made .flow a lot less vast and unnecessarily big, and I couldn't tell you if this should be looked at as a positive or a negative for the game in terms of being a Yume Nikki style game, but I will say that it definitely helped keep things nice and simple. It didn't quite have the same wow factor as the other games, but .flow kind of focused on being a dark and psychological horror experience first, while still keeping the identity that it was indeed a Yume Nikki fan game. It only really had one string to its bow, and that bolstered the entire experience for me because it knew what it wanted to be, and it doubled down on that. The worlds still had that sprawling aspect to them where they looped, but .flow had a more streamlined experience as a direct cause to it having fewer areas to wander off into and getting lost inside of. I actually managed to complete most of .flow without even touching the wiki pages, which was a first for a goddamn Yume Nikki game. And as a result of this, it allowed me to stay immersed in the dream world, the environments, the music, the ambiance, etc. It says a lot more for the experience of a game when you can kind of focus on it, rather than getting pulled out of the experience entirely to look up where the next piece of the puzzle is, without, spending 3 hours running around aimlessly, so that was definitely plus for that reasoning. Also, .flow had a lot of subtlety that led to fan theories behind it. Just play the game and read the theory sections about it if you want to know what I'm talking about, but there's like a ton of attention to detail given to the main character, Sabutsuki, that is carefully sprinkled into the game without being too in your face. This is the extent of what I can say without spoiling the entire experience for you. It's a big reveal that you may not even realize on your first playthrough of the game. Now, as I said before, Yume Nikki sits on the opposite end of the spectrum as .flow, which means that if the last title was short, sweet, and to the point, Yume Nikki would have to be vast, confusing, and rely heavier on a wiki page open. Now let's cut the bullshit here so I can say my piece. I don't like Yume Nikki. Its cons far outweigh its pros for me personally, and the game drives me nuts. But I don't want to say that it's a shitty fan game because someone somewhere put their heart and soul into this game or released it for free, so being a negative Nancy isn't going to do me any favors or win me over any merits. But I do need to say my piece and say that Yume Nikki has a terrible problem with its world design. It is the only game of the 4 that I have played that even has this problem. You see, Yume Nikki, like I said before, has a larger dream world. If memory serves me correct, I remember the game having twice as many individual maps saved in the file directory when I downloaded it than Yume Nikki had. This aspect alone isn't a terrible choice, but it's how various other things about the game just don't really synergize well with a larger world. For example, having more places to go would naturally mean that you want to implement more points in the dream world that teleport you from point A to point B. Now, do you all remember what I mentioned back in the Yume Nikki segment about not really knowing what an effect even looks like? Well, that also means teleports. Yume Nikki games tend to have you running around a vast open space, touching literally everything around you like a newborn baby until something happens. And in Yume Nikki, usually that something results in teleporting you to the opposite end of the fucking dream world through a one-way teleport that you didn't know existed 30 seconds ago. Because you know what I find the most fun about a collect-a-thon game? The part where you're just starting to get a grasp of the environment you're inside of with a small semblance of direction before the game just decided to yeet your sorry ass into the fucking Shadow Realm. And this problem gets exacerbated by the fact that Yume Nikki is a Japanese game, meaning that there are localization issues with its wiki. Hell, you can't even play Yume Nikki without the use of an application called AppLocale, which translates the files for your machine. Take note, .flow also requires AppLocale, but at least the wiki isn't flat out wrong about the location of an effect, causing you to waste even more time wandering around aimlessly. What's worse is that Yume Nikki also has random number generators for if certain warps are available when you enter the dream world. Yeah. So the game rolls the dice every time that you go to sleep to see if you can even reach certain areas of the dream to get the effect in the first place. Hold up, let me pull out my D20 and... Ooh, sorry Jimbo, looks like you're going to the gulag today. Like, seriously, everything about the world exploration in Yume Nikki pisses me off, which is one of the main appeals of a Yume Nikki game. But Yume Nikki takes all of the annoying aspects of it and just goes, you know what, let's double down and make it even worse for everyone because fuck you. Fuck you because I said so. So, yeah. The game is super big, you're literally always lost, there are a ton of one-way teleports that waste your fucking time, because you have to wake up and re-enter the dream world if you screw up. RNG depicts whether or not some worlds are even accessible, and the wiki is completely misleading, so yeah, good luck with this one. Alright, I have expelled the negativity. Let's praise the good parts now. Like I said, the game isn't a shitty fan game, it's just an even shittier game than other Yume Nikki games, but there are some aspects of Yume Nikki that really make me want to slog through it again, and one of the best aspects of Yume Nikki are the wallpapers. Doing certain things in the game will unlock a wallpaper that you can set on Uritsuki's desktop, which is also where you save the game. If there's anything that was really well done with Yume Nikki, it's definitely the artwork. It has a lot of really cute main character selfies, and even some scary shit here. And most of these wallpapers sort of serve as a milestone for the places that you've been and the things that you have done. Not only that, but I have to say, the music that it plays when you get onto her desktop is one of the best tracks that I have ever heard out of a Yume Nikki game, period. Like, just listen to this shit.
With a certain camera effect, really. Did I want that one? I might. You're weird.
The second thing that Yume Nikki does that literally should be in every Yume Nikki game is combining your effects. So, I barely touched this mechanic, but you may have noticed in the gameplay for these games that my character will often change appearance after accessing my menu to use one of the many effects in the game. This is pretty much how effects work. They change your appearance and also have some level of utility to them that can be extremely useful in some cases, and in other cases, not so much whatsoever. Some of them are must-haves, though. You know what's better than running around as a cute little blonde wolf in a whimsical dreamland? Activating your motorcycle effect and turning into a cute blonde wolf riding a damn motorcycle like some semi-furry biker chick who ain't got time to waste walking around like a pleb. You can combine certain effects by using them one after another in Yume Nikki, and that's just pretty damn cool. I'm pretty sure this is only for cosmetic reasons, but it's still a lovely attention to detail. Alright, I'm droning too long about the two fan games that I have played, and we still need to push forward, so let me conclude this segment. If you're going to touch Yume Nikki fan games before you touch the official 2018 remake, then all I can tell you is that they are definitely worth your time if you can appreciate the work that a fan base will put into something they are truly passionate about. I don't want to shit on a free fan game too hard because at the end of the day, I really only lost a bit of my time to get an experience that was meant to emulate more of something that was very enjoyable for me. And that is an admirable thing. I would heavily suggest that you try .flow after playing Yume Nikki if you wanted more psychological horror and eeriness to the initial experience. And I heavily suggest that you try Yume Nikki if you want something just more lighthearted but still retain some of the horror bits in some areas of the dream world. .flow also has more work in the theory crafting side of it, whereas Yume Nikki is, again, just lighthearted and less serious. Just don't expect to complete Yume Nikki. That game is a fucking garbage fire to find your way around. So here we are, folks. It's been 14 to 16 years since the initial release of Yume Nikki. Announcements came to Steam. Kikiyama is back, and Kadokawa Corporation is developing a project called Yume Nikki Dream Diary. This game was advertised on the Steam page as being a project that was supervised by Kikiyama himself, who obviously created the game the fans all knew and loved. It was an announcement that hyped up the entire fandom. Well, until it didn't. Now, to be perfectly clear here, I don't dislike Yume Nikki Dream Diary. I got my money's worth and I was alright with the experience, but I will say that this game should not be played with the assumption that it is meant to be a recreation of your original experience. A lot of people really busted the balls of this game when it came out, but I'll be honest, I didn't necessarily agree with all the ball busting. Not completely, at least. Now, you might be wondering, why exactly was the game received so poorly? Well, for starters, the game is similar to indie games like Inside and Limbo, where it is ultimately two-dimensional, but the graphics are in 3D, so it looks realistic, but you move in two-dimensional space. That stepped on a lot of people's toes because this limits the remake from being able to accomplish what its predecessor did well. The remake stripped a lot of freedoms that you had to just explore the game world, and instead it introduced a number of puzzles to the gameplay loop. It became linear and still retained that collect-a-thon feel, but no longer with the effects. In the remake, your aim was to clear each level in the Nexus, as well as find each of the little red jellyfish dudes, who me and Holly had appropriately named Noodles. That's a loop. Oh, hello. Noodles, yes. The effects in this game were, well, they were more like tools that you would utilize to progress through the game. Think of each effect like an upgrade in a Metroidvania kind of game. They were necessary tools to advance rather than neat little rewards for exploring. And while the original game did require certain effects to reach other areas of the dream world to reach the ending, I think you literally only required the Yuki-onna or the umbrella effect to reach the poop hair effect. And yes, you heard me right, ladies and gentlemen, poop hair effect. Anyway, speaking of endings, the game has a few endings depending on whether or not you do something very specific after collecting every iteration of Noodles in the dream worlds. There are also collectible diary pages with some OG artwork of the characters and places that you see in the dream world to stir up some nostalgia, but that's really about it. The remake was more grounded and straightforward of an experience, and there were people within the fandom that just really didn't like that. I'll be honest, I never really followed the progression of the game's development, so maybe that's why my opinion of the remake isn't as negative as others, but if you can go into Dream Diary with the understanding that it's just a different experience that captures some of the nostalgia, then you can have a decent time here. Whether or not it's worth $20 is a totally different story, however. I also can't shake the feeling that the remake was meant to have more in it, eventually as they updated things, but to my knowledge, aside from the one big patch shortly after release that made a change to the Yuboa event and add a few new worlds, I'm pretty sure the Dream Diary is mostly untouched from the release build in terms of content. I feel like this might attribute to some of the ball busting, but again, I just think this game functions really well for the approach that the devs were aiming for in terms of a passion project. It's not excellent, but it wasn't bad either. Alright, well, there you go, folks. With that out of the way, this pretty much goes through my entire time with the Yume Nikki franchise in totality. It is a neat little game that can really only be best described as there isn't anything out there that is like Yume Nikki, aside from maybe LSD Dream Simulator, but that game is old, clunky, weird, and somehow even more confusing than Yume Nikki was. I don't even know how the hell that's possible. The experience from each of the games I have played is incredibly memorable to me. Even the remake, which might shock some people, but it's true. Everything from the music choice, the effects and attention to detail with character sprites, the layout of the dream world, the various save stations, and just the general ambiance of the games is something that is truly special. So, yeah. Yume Nikki definitely wasn't a good game, at least on an objective level. The core gameplay to Yume Nikki isn't something I would even describe as being designed as an inherently fun game to play. I know fun is subjective, but the point is that Yume Nikki was a game designed with the journey in mind, and not really the destination. And you know what? That's good enough for me, man. If you guys like the video, then you know what to do. More importantly, if you want to contribute to the conversation, then say something down below. Whether you think I missed something, or you agree with my points, or even just want to gush about nostalgia like I did for... I don't know. How long? Fucking 25 minutes or so. Probably 30 minutes now. Either way, I'd love to stir up some good old-fashioned Yume Nikki conversation. Anyways, with that being said, I'm gonna take off, folks. Took me a bit to write the script, so I hope it wasn't too abysmal by the end, and take a look at some of the old Let's Play playlists for these games if you want to do some visual research before diving in. On that note, take it easy, my friends. I will see you later.